Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Well, today we're going to do an oversimplified video, the French Revolution. This is going to give us a lot of context that leads up to the Napoleonic Wars. It's going to lay the groundwork of how the French Revolution started, how it happened, etc., etc. Glad you're here with me. Let's jump right in. Hit that like button. Let go.
It was made possible by NordVPN. Get protected by clicking the link below and get an amazing 75% off. That's only two merch available net heads, just for, including King Louis and Marie Antoinette character pins, complete with detachable heads, just like the real thing. So I said to the Marquis de la Fayette, "What do you think I am? Some dirty peasant? I've never worked a day in my life." Wow, that Marie Antoinette sure is pretty. Sure is. Wouldn't want to be Prince Louis though. That's going to be a lot of responsibility when he becomes king, especially since France is in financial ruin. Quite. Thank you one and all for attending the royal marriage of my grandson, the future King of France, to the Archduchess of Austria. Now for the very awkward yet historically accurate part of the ceremony, where we all watch them get into bed together.
Yeah, that's kind of weird, isn't it? His emo hair.
All right, now that's out of the way, let's leave the royal couple to it. You better give us an heir, you fat, ill-bred boy. Nighty-night. That's gonna be a lot of responsibility. France is in financial ruin. You fat, ill-bred boy. Quite. That's gonna be a lot of responsibility. France is in financial ruin. Fat, ill-bred boy. That's gonna be a lot of responsibility.
A lot of pressure.
Oh, great. He's a freaking weirdo.
Here we go.
France, the most prosperous, cultured, and beautiful nation in the world, as it had been for centuries. An exquisite social culture, with the king and the upper classes throwing crazy parties every night, enjoying high living and fine dining.
Feudalism.
Who cares that they were only able to do so off the backs of the hard-working, starving poor? What are they gonna do? Revolt?
Nah. It ain't like they just helped a revolution in the Americas. It's not like, you know, they're gonna catch that and be like,
Only 80% of the population. No. Life in France is great. What's that, France? You want to go to war with Britain and increase your power? Go for it, little buddy. You do you. And you lost. Now you're in severe financial debt. We have no money. What do? Should we stop partying? Heck no. Party harder. That's okay. The peasantry will pick up the slack. They were created by God to do all the work, and you were created to reap all the benefits and party hard.
Isn't that a crazy way of thinking? And think about that, like if you're on the peasant side, your thought that your life is almost as useless as you are. Think about that. That's not going to sit well with some people.
It's just how society works, and we've all just accepted it for centuries. Why? Why what? Why do the nobility get to be all rich and stuff? Just because they were born into it? And the rest of us schmucks just have to accept that? Hell, why do we even need a king? Who decided that? It all just seems very unfair and unequal, and I, for one, am starting to question it. Wow, that's very enlightened of you.
The Enlightenment.
And so began the Age of Enlightenment. Great philosophical thinkers across France and beyond began to question whether this beautiful nation was really all that beautiful after all. Hey, Prince Louis, bad news. Your grandpop died of smallpox this morning, which means good news, you're now the king. So, just to sum up, France is in severe financial debt, and the angry populace are beginning to question how necessary you are. But hey, I believe in you, champ. You got this. Maybe.
Maybe.
Oh no! Prince Louis Capet became King Louis XVI in May 1774. He was a notoriously weak man, and he knew it. He barely had the wisdom to rule a nation, never mind one in crisis, and he was easily manipulated by those around him.
He was basically a puppet.
One of his first acts was to try to get revenge on the British by financing their American colonies' revolution. Hey, we're an independent nation now. That was real swell of you, Louis. Couldn't have done it without you. Glad I could help. So hey, about all that money we lent you, when can we get that back? Yep, you're a great guy. I'll never forget what you've done for us. Real glad I could help, friend, but about that money, gotta go now, chum. Best of luck to you.
What are y'all gonna do?
No.
Exactly.
And now France was in even more debt. France is poor, suffering under
I gotta look at this chart.
No. And now France...
We're rich, party time. We're losing money, still party time. We have no money. Party to forget. Head's gonna roll. LOJK, keep parties.
Was in even more debt. France's poor, suffering under the strain of economic ruin, watched as the nobility continued to live as though nothing was wrong. In particular, they grew increasingly disdainful of the Queen, Marie Antoinette, as she continued to spend all of France's money on her own luxurious lifestyle and fashion. While the peasants were breaking their backs in the fields, she was walking around like, hey, my hair is about.
I mean, a lot of people wouldn't even know about this stuff if it wasn't for the printing press, which is, I don't know if they're going to talk about it, but because of Gutenberg, because of the printing press, because of newspapers and independent media, that's really what starts the revolution. A voice, a human response to an effect of feudalism.
I'm not making that up. Her hair really was about.
Yep.
And her lavish spending earned her the nickname Madame Deficit. And speaking of the Queen, there was also a long-standing scandal around the fact that the king took a very long time to boink her, and the working classes of Paris began ridiculing the royal couple with lewd pamphlets depicting the Queen as a court thought, and the king as a wuss, unable to fulfill his marital duty.
Big
Respect
oof.
for the monarchy was at an all-time
Love and respect, beat Killer Mike. RESPECT. A little respect. Show some respect.
low, as France's finances were spiraling out of control, and the king and his aides really only had one solution to the crisis. Tax the poor. Tax the poor. We could do a sexy calendar shoot.
What?
I mean,
Tax the poor.
tax the poor. And so it was. The poor, who were already struggling to make ends meet, found themselves being taxed from every direction. Hey, I'm the royal tax collector. Looks like you've yet to pay your income tax, head tax. By the way, how many windows you got in that house of yours? 3? Oof, yep. There's gonna be a tax for that. Hey, your local priest here. Have you paid your church tithe yet? Well, at least this one is going to the good work of God.
Sure. About that.
God. I think this year, God wants me to buy a new swimming pool. Hey, private tax collector here. Oh, and I brought some goons with me. Just a few quick questions. How much salt did you buy this year? About 7 kilos, I think? Yep. Okay, there's gonna be a tax for that. Oh, what's that over there? And that's extra salt I held over from last year, so wouldn't have to buy as much this year. Oh, yep, there's a tax for that.
It's a gains tax.
And what are you doing with all this salt? Well, obviously cooking. Mm-hmm. On the table. Yep. And preserving fish and meat. Oh no. Yep, there's a tax for that. Hey, how old is he? He's 9. And so he's purchased his required amount of salt for this year, right? What? No, he's 9. Uh-oh, sorry, little Timmy. Looks like I'm gonna have to tax you for that.
Poor Timmy. Salty.
Yep, salty. There's gonna be a tax for that. And that's not all. A huge portion of the peasants' harvest had to be given up. And there was also the labor tax, where peasants were required to work a certain number of days for their local lord without pay. Obviously, people weren't too happy with these taxation policies, and the aggressive nature of these private
It's like indentured servitude almost.
tax farmers sometimes even escalated to violence. In particular, though, the people really hated how inconsistent the taxation rules were across the nation, and also the fact that the first 2 estates often had to pay very little, if any, tax at all. And so, the anger continued to grow. France had a population that was just about ready to explode. What could push them over the edge? How about a touch of natural disaster? A series of harsh summers and winters left the peasants' harvests in ruin, meaning they had no food or money, and the cost of bread skyrocketed. Of course, the upper classes had massive stocks of grain and wheat, so they were virtually untouched by this new crisis. But now the poor really were starving, and they began to riot. Women took to the streets, bakeries were raided, and bakers suspected of keeping bread for themselves were sometimes even hanged. Wow, this is really getting out of control. Your Majesty, we need some decisive action. You need to step up and lead us. What will you do? Okay, I've got this. I know. I'll summon the Estates General, and they'll decide what to do. You really are a fat, ill-bred boy.
Dang.
The Estates General was the closest thing France had to a government, apart from the king. It was a purely advisory body, and was rarely summoned. In fact, it hadn't been summoned for 175 years.
What? That's a total monarchy. I didn't know it was a total monarchy. Insane.
Prior to this. But with France in a severe crisis, the king felt the time was right to call on the government to help. The Estates General was made up of representatives from the 3 estates, that is, the clergy, the nobility, and everybody else. Okay, thanks for coming everyone. The first order of business is regarding the clergy and nobility. You all get brand new Porsches. You get a Porsche, and you get a Porsche, and you get a Porsche. Everybody gets a Porsche. And now into the second order of business. France is completely out of money. Like, it's never been this bad before. Anyone got any ideas? How about we all get Lamborghinis next time? The king decided that in order to make a decision, they had to come up with a voting system. Okay, the clergy. You have a population of 130,000, so you'll get 1 vote. The nobility. You have a population of 350,000, so you'll also get 1 vote. And the third estate. You have a population of 27 million people and make up 98% of the population. Very impressive. You'll get 1 vote. The third estate were obviously pretty unhappy with this system because they kept on finding that this would happen. We propose to raise taxes on the third estate. All in favor? All opposed? 2 to 1. Taxes will be raised on the third estate. We propose a motion that says the first 2 estates are a bunch of poo-poo heads. All in favor? All opposed? 2 to 1. It's official. We are not poo-poo heads. The third estate realized that any attempt at reform would be outvoted by the 2 upper estates, and they thought that was kind of lame. So
it's called cronyism in its finest right here.
They decided that since they were 98% of the population, they could go off to form their own government, make their own laws, and take over the running of the country. And so, the National Assembly was born. The third estate was now in control, and there was nothing the king could do to stop. Haha! I've locked you all out of your building. What are you going to do about it? We'll probably go find a different building that isn't locked.
Think about that one,
No!
man.
The National Assembly did find another unlocked building, just down the road, an indoor tennis court, where on the 20th of June 1789, they all took the tennis court oath, pledging to continue meeting until the king finally gave in to their demands for more equality and economic reform. This new National Assembly included many of the most educated members of the Third Estate, including 2 young lawyers by the names of Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton. Some members of the first 2 estates even joined their cause. Some of these men formed a radical new political party called the Jacobin Club and quickly became leading figures. While many members of the Third Estate simply wanted more equality, a growing number in this Jacobin faction would begin calling for something even crazier: the removal of the king entirely. And this is where fear began to take hold. With such a volatile situation developing, everyone was afraid of something. The king feared his position was under threat, and he called in the military to take position around Paris. The Third Estate heard rumor of the gathering military force, and they feared the king was planning to round them up and arrest them. Maybe he'd even execute them. It also didn't help that the king had just dismissed France's popular finance minister, who had been trying to make reforms himself. It seemed the king was done negotiating. Fear, left unchecked, often boils over into anger, and anger detonates with violence. The angry people of Paris, after centuries of cruel inequality, harsh oppression, even starvation, fearful of having their new movement for reform demolished so soon, decided that it was now or never to take action. Screw reform. They decided they'd do one better. How about revolution? The people of Paris, believing the French military was preparing to attack, decided they should arm themselves. The National Assembly announced the creation of a bourgeois militia, the National Guard, and immediately, many troops from the French military defected over to the revolutionary side. In the early hours of July 14th, 1789, a large crowd stormed and raided the Hôtel des Invalides, a military hospital where they were able to secure a large number of rifles.
And that's all it takes.
The bad news was, they weren't able to find any gunpowder for their new weapons. The good news was, they knew exactly where to get some.
Bastille.
A prison fortress and a symbol of royal tyranny towering over Paris, the Bastille. Mid-morning, the crowd gathered around the Bastille and demanded that the man in charge, Governor Delaunay, surrender the prison and hand over the gunpowder. Obviously, Governor Delaunay was like, no way. So he stalled for time by inviting a few members of the crowd in for negotiations. The crowd, still waiting outside, quickly became impatient, and before long, they stormed the fortress, taking on the French troops inside. Your Majesty, we've received word that the people have surrounded the Bastille. Governor Delaunay will hold them off. No need to worry. Actually, Your Majesty, it appears the crowd is now headed away from the Bastille. You see? What did I tell you? Clearly Governor Delaunay has defeated them and has them on the run. No need to worry. Your Majesty, isn't that Governor Delaunay's head on a pike?
Oh my god.
Well,
did that actually happen? Jeez.
Clearly,
Not the fact that they stormed the Bastille, but that he got piked.
Governor Delaunay has taken on the form of a bodiless pikehead deity, and the people are so enamored with him, they're parading him around the city. No need to worry at all. When the National Assembly heard about the violence that had taken place, they had two options. Either one, they denounce it and try to carry on the revolution using peaceful means, or two, they say, damn, you stuck his head on a pike? That's pretty hardcore. And we love it. Incidentally, they went with option number two.
Wow.
Some historians believe this reaction paved the way for the utter violence and bloodshed that would become the legacy of the French Revolution. This widespread acceptance of violence during the Revolution is also largely credited to the writings of a certain Jean-Paul Marat.
This guy was not a happy fella.
A man of science with a horrible skin condition that kept him confined to a bathtub. He began writing a radical newspaper he affectionately named The Friend of the People. Citizens of France, be very afraid. Given the chance, the king and the nobility won't hesitate to massacre us all. The solution is simple. Execute them. Kill every last one of them. Cut off 1,000 heads, and if that's not enough, cut off 1,000 more. Oh, hey Mr. Squeaky, what are you doing down there? You're so cute. Aw, I love you too, Mr. Squeaky. Mwah. Now where was I? Oh yeah. Kill them all. It became one of the most popular publications in Paris.
And usually, at this point, that would be an outlawed media source. But media was just beginning to be a thing at this time. The First Amendment of freedom of speech was not so laid out as it is today.
During the revolution, and succeeded in spreading ever-increasing fear and anger among the people. In August, leaders of the National Assembly, with help from a certain Thomas Jefferson, adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, an incredible document that guaranteed liberty and equal rights to all men. And when I say men, I mean men. Despite its glaring shortcomings in gender equality, the massively influential declaration would go on to inspire the struggle for liberty and equality across the planet for centuries. However, back in France, the vast majority of the people weren't really so concerned with enlightened ideas of equality as much as they were concerned with the fact that they were still starving. Bread was still expensive as hell and hard to come by. The people felt that one reason nothing had been done yet about the crisis was because the king simply couldn't see the problem. He lived in Versailles, a full 20 kilometers southwest of Paris, and as a result...
I didn't know those that far away from Paris. I thought it was more like maybe a couple miles.
Lived in comfort, separated from his dirty, stinking subjects. On October 5th, a crowd of women, 7,000 strong, decided they'd do something unprecedented. They decided they'd remove that separation and confront the king directly. The women marched all the way to the king's palace in Versailles. Along the way, the crowd continued to grow into the tens of thousands, and when they arrived, they demanded an audience with the king. What are those things outside the palace? They're poor people, your majesty. That's poor people? They say they're hungry. Hungry? Then let them eat cake. Wow. See, this is the exact BS that led to this whole mess in the first place. You're so out of touch. They're writhing around in the filth, breaking their back to barely scrape by, and they come to you demanding just the basic ability to feed themselves, and you think a slice of cake will sort them out? Well,
2 slices.
then let them eat Taco Bell Crunchwrap Supreme.
There you go.
Wow. They're not that desperate.
Oh
Members
my.
of the crowd actually managed to break into the palace with the intention of killing the queen, who narrowly escaped through a secret passage in her bedroom. The enraged mob killed several members of the royal guard and raised their heads on pikes,
Oh my.
which if you haven't noticed yet, is something they were quite fond of doing. The king had no choice but to come out and talk to the crowd. He agreed to accept his new position, sharing power with the revolutionary government, and to return to Paris with the crowd, removing the separation between king and subject. King Louis had a problem with people constantly raiding his palace, but one thing he didn't have a problem with was people you don't like having nor 5 and 5. He helped with Hanover, and while you're its country's girlfriend, like me, was people Louis had a problem.
That's it for part 1, guys. That's insane. The lead up. But I mean, it makes so much sense. Like, it's just a feudalism that just over time it cracked. The foundation of this economy cracked. It's crazy to me that it took 175 years for someone other than the monarch to make a governmental decision. Now I know he has like individuals in charge of, you know, this department and this department, but at the top it was more of an executive one branch of government versus a parliamentary or the Estates General. That thing was more or less a what do you call it? A decoration to the administration versus an actual functional piece of the administration. So that shows that out of touch spending, classes, just entire the economic and governmental way of doing things for a country that large. It's just not. It's not. It's not a good thing. It's just not, and that's what how revolution happens. Southern Americas saw that with France. Maybe a half a century later, we see it with a bunch of other European monarchs, because Europe is just a conglomerate of monarchs right now. Not all total monarchs. For example, it's very different in Great Britain than France. And France is very different than Spain. And Spain's very different than Austria and the HRE. And there's so much other stuff. But we got part 2 coming up. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can watch part 2 and react to that together. Until next time, guys. Peace out. Bye-bye. Welcome back, guys. We got part 2 of Oversimplified's French Revolution. So let's just jump right into it. Hit that like button. Let go.
Couple of years, he watched as a revolutionary. We're now in the Tuileries Palace in Paris, where for the next couple of years, he watched as the revolutionary government began to strip away his power. And fearing for his safety, he had to stay on their good side. Hey, look who it is. It's my favorite revolutionaries. Yep, I'm your #1 fan. What can I do for you? Hey, King Louis. So we've made a few decisions. First, all of your friends in the nobility are gonna have to pay taxes the same as everyone else. Great idea. I love it. And as a side note, the tax money can no longer pay for all your lavish parties. Great. I hate those parties. They're so awkward. And also, we're taking away your Porsche. Oh, come on! I mean, yay. The king continually found demand after demand being made of him to prove his support for the revolution. On one occasion, a mob would invade the palace and demand he wear the revolutionary bonnet. This is the face of a man who is definitely pretending he wants to wear that bonnet. Now around here, I want to mention that one thing King Louis had a problem with was people constantly raiding his palace. But one thing he didn't have a problem with was raiding noobs. On this video,
there we go.
Situation rapidly turning against him, the king decided it might be a good idea to leave France and mount a campaign to retake his country from abroad. Luckily for him, he was married to an Austrian. So on the night of June 20th, 1791, the king and his family disguised themselves as servants and attempted to flee to the Austrian Netherlands. The royal carriage made a stop in the town of Varennes, and the postmaster there was like, "Hey guys, what's up? Where are you off to?" "We are but a collection of inconspicuous servants heading for the border for no particular reason at all." "Say, you, the fat one, you look kind of familiar. Aren't you the king?" "Nope. Let me see your passport. It says here you're King Louis XVI. "Nope, not me." Take him away, boys. The king was promptly returned to Paris, but now the jig was up.
Now he looks suspicious.
Lack of support for the revolution was clear to all, and many considered him a straight-up traitor who tried to abandon his people. As a result, the new constitution of 1791 completely reduced his powers to that of a simple figurehead, a constitutional monarch. However, radicals, such as those in the Jacobin Club, were outraged that the king wasn't to be removed entirely. So a month later, these radicals staged a protest on the Champ de Mars, calling for the king's removal. The government of Paris feared an insurrection was mounting, and they sent the military to disperse the crowd. The confrontation escalated and resulted in the Revolutionary National Guard firing on a crowd of revolutionaries. It was a massacre. The incident exposed a deep division within the Brotherhood of the Revolution. On one side, the moderates who wanted to keep the king as a figurehead. On the other, radicals who wanted to see the king deposed and heads roll. In the wake of the massacre, these radicals received a wave of support. And speaking of rolling heads, one form of equality the revolution introduced was equality in execution. This meant no more torturous drawing and quartering, no more inhumane hanging. They wanted all criminals, regardless of economic status, to receive the same penalty, a quick and painless one. Luckily, a man by the name of Dr. Joseph Guillotine had an idea. A heavy blade that falls like thunder. The head flies off, blood spurts, and the man is no more. The guillotine, otherwise known as the national razor. The guillotine made its debut in 1791 as the new form of execution. The writings of Marat and others continued to call for the execution of anyone suspected of working against the revolution. For him, this included some members of the clergy and nobility who had previously benefited from the cruel system of inequality that existed before the revolution. In many parts of the countryside, local lords had found themselves become a target. Sire, the peasants, they're revolting. Oh, come on, that's a bit harsh. Sure, they smell a bit, but I wouldn't say they're revolting. Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. Increasingly, these French aristocrats began fleeing France to find solitude in other parts of Europe. And once again, fear began to take hold. The privileged classes of these foreign nations didn't like what they were seeing because they feared revolutionary ideas may spread to their own lands. The National Assembly, actually now the Legislative Assembly, feared that these nations may decide to attack. Then why don't we attack them first? No, you idiots, we are definitely not ready for war yet. Did somebody say something? France declared war on Austria in April 1792 and immediately got pummeled.
And Austria is basically the entire HRE at that point.
Also didn't help that Austria's ally, Prussia, joined in the fighting. The Prussian Duke of Brunswick posted a letter warning the revolutionaries that if anything happened to the king, he would burn Paris to the ground. The Duke's letter proved to be a massive success in inspiring the people of Paris to do the exact opposite of what he intended. They were enraged by the threat, and on the 10th of August 1792, the tension in the city exploded, and a mob stormed the king's palace. Fighting broke out between the revolutionaries and the king's Swiss guard, with casualties in the hundreds. King Louis fled and took refuge in the chamber of the Legislative Assembly, where Robespierre and his radical Jacobins were gaining ever more power. Given the developing situation, the chamber decided to hold a vote, and in what some considered to be a second revolution, it was decided to suspend the monarchy entirely. King Louis XVI was now just plain old Louis, and he was sent to a prison cell where an eye could be kept on him. A month later, the newly established National Convention officially declared the French Republic, and society underwent a massive change. Enlightened ideas of democracy and equality were being implemented, but very quickly, these ideas seemed to become secondary to fear, paranoia, and a thirst for blood. The new republic began working to violently remove any semblance of the old royalist regime. The church became a prime target. Priests who refused to take an oath to the revolution were deported or arrested.
And this really brings out like not a hatred, but more of a atheistic ideology.
A new state-sponsored atheistic religion named the Cult of Reason was created as a replacement for the Catholic Church. Notre Dame, along with many other churches, had their religious treasures destroyed and were converted to temples of reason. Even the Christian calendar didn't survive, as a brand new revolutionary calendar was soon introduced.
That's why you have something like the 18th Brumaire, which we'll see in the future.
Hey honey, I'm home. Yeah, whatever, jerk. Whoa, what's wrong with you? You forgot. Forgot what? Everything. This entire year. My birthday was on the 3rd of Germinal, our anniversary was the 12th of Thermidor, and you promised that in Frimaire, we'd go on a romantic weekend trip to Venice. No, I said we'd do that in December. December hasn't been a thing for years. The government of Paris, now under the control of the radical sans-culottes, began rounding up suspected enemies of the revolution and sending them to prison in the thousands. Naturally, a large number of those arrested were members of the clergy and aristocracy. As France's foreign enemies continued to close in, panic spread. Georges Danton made impassioned calls for men to defend the Republic, and tens of thousands of troops left Paris for the front lines. However, in their absence, Paris was left to its own devices. As enemy troops arrived in Verdun, the people of Paris feared that their crowded prisons were becoming a breeding ground for counter-revolutionary conspiracy. What would happen if the Prussians reached Paris and freed the aristocrats? Marat believed he knew what would happen. The aristocrats would enact their vengeance on the people. Fearing those they had already imprisoned, mobs descended on Paris's prisons. They broke in, and during the brutal September massacres, aristocrats, priests, and others were tried and executed on the spot. Even women and children weren't spared. With over 1,600 victims, word of the massacre spread across Europe. One British newspaper wondered, are these the rights of man? Is this the liberty of human nature? But there was still one man in particular that Robespierre and his radicals really wanted to see executed. Austria and Prussia pledged that after they defeated France, they'd return King Louis to the throne. Well, checkmate Austria and Prussia, because you can't return a man to the throne if he's already dead. Citizen Louis Capet was put on trial for treason. Obviously, he was found guilty, but his punishment was less certain. Many moderates wanted to simply deport him, but Robespierre insisted the revolution could only live if the king was dead. A vote was held, and by just one vote, Louis was sentenced to the guillotine.
Wow.
If you don't mind,
one vote.
I'd like to say a few words first. Gentlemen, I am innocent of everything of which I am accused. Wait, you're too loud. They can't hear me. Hang on, I haven't finished yet. Wait, dude! Uncool. In her prison cell, Marie Antoinette heard the guns fire, signaling her husband's death. Before long, she would meet the same fate. Back on the war front, France defied all expectations and actually managed to push the enemy back. But then more countries joined the coalition against France, and it all went to pot again. What do? Conscript the masses. The National Convention
Basically, let's get in a draft going.
introduced a conscription law, with each regional department having to meet a certain quota of men for the army. However, not everyone was happy with this new law. You see, while Paris was definitely a hotbed for radical revolutionary fervor, some of the regions outside of Paris weren't quite so keen on the revolution. Some were largely still conservative, still supported the church, and just didn't suffer from that much inequality before the revolution. So as the revolution turned increasingly violent and anti-Christian, many were outraged. Now, they were being conscripted to fight for the new republic they hated. That was the last straw. Counter-revolutionary uprisings erupted in a number of regions across France. Some would last for years, such as in the northwest, where a large-scale uprising was led by the Owls. Why were they called the Owls? Because their leader was named Jean Owl. Why was he called Jean Owl? Possibly because he could do a really good impression of an owl. Really? That's what we're going with? Owls? Just because this guy can do an impression of one? Hit him with it, Jean. Hoot, hoot. Yeah, okay, that's pretty good. The Chouannerie uprising lasted all the way until 1800. In the summer of 1793, the southern city of Toulon invited the British Navy over for some tea and crumpets.
We're already at Toulon. Okay, we're about to meet Mr. Napoleon then.
And then they asked if they'd possibly like to stay and occupy the city. Being an important naval base, this was a heavy blow to the Republic, who sent a relatively unknown young captain by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte to help stage the siege of the city. Toulon was recaptured by France in the winter, and for his service, Napoleon was promoted to the rank of Brigadier General. The most infamous counter-revolution, however, occurred in the Vendée region. Throughout 1793, revolutionary forces clashed with the region's Catholic and Royal Army. The Republic defeated the counter-revolution through cruel pacification. In particular, General Jean-Baptiste Carrier committed brutal atrocities. In one instance, he had thousands of civilians, priests, women, and children tied to ships, which were then sunk.
What?
Carrier would later be found guilty of war crimes and executed.
Good.
Back in Paris, the government was still dominated by moderates. With the war going badly, revolts in the provinces, and the economy getting worse, it seemed the government just wasn't doing a very good job. Radicals' fear for the safety of the revolution intensified, and Marat even began calling for the moderates in the government to be executed. In return, the moderates called for the arrest of Marat. This led to a chain of events with the two sides in heated conflict. Robespierre declared the Jacobins to be an insurrection and called on the people to arm themselves. It all ended on the 31st of May 1793, with the National Convention surrounded by radical sans-culottes and 29 moderate Girondin politicians arrested. From this moment on, the moderates ceased to be a political force. Robespierre and his radicals would be in almost total control of the government.
And this is going to be the Great Terror.
And this brings us to the story of a woman named Charlotte Corday. Charlotte lived in the northwest city of Caen, and like many in the area, was horrified at the rapid radicalization and increasing violence of the revolution. And the man she blamed more than anyone was Jean-Paul Marat. She wanted to bring peace back to France, and so she did something drastic. She traveled to Paris and told Marat she had a list of enemies for him to publish in his paper. Marat eagerly invited her in for a meeting. So where's that list of enemies you promised me? Here it is. Wait a minute. This isn't a list of enemies. It just says, yippee-ki-yay, mother... And just like that, Marat was no more. Charlotte was quickly arrested and sent to the guillotine.
Which makes sense though, it's murder.
Her dream of restoring peace, however, died with her. Marat became a martyr. In temples of reason, symbols of the dead Marat became the new crucifix. In death, he became an even more powerful inspiration for the extreme levels of violence that were about to rip throughout the new republic. And that's right, here comes the Reign of Terror. If you thought this revolution already sounds pretty violent, well, you ain't seen nothing yet, son. The radicals were now in control, and they believed not only was France surrounded by foreign enemies, but that within the masses, there were also plenty of internal ones too. Individuals not loyal to the revolution, conspiring to bring about its downfall. Robespierre and...
This is like a very, 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 very radical version of like the Red Scare.
The rest of the radical faction were having none of it. A new committee of public safety was established with 12 members. Its purpose was to protect the new French Republic from its enemies, and it basically became a 12-man dictatorship with Robespierre as its leading voice. The Revolutionary Tribunal was also reinstated, a special court created to streamline the process of trying suspected enemies and handing out their death sentences. With these two new institutions, Robespierre wanted to scare France's enemies straight. In September 1793, it was announced that terror would be the order of the day. In other words, fear had become official government policy. And from then onwards, we enter into the period known as the Reign of Terror. Spies and secret police were everywhere and watched the people closely. France's public had to be extremely careful what they said and how they behaved. Obviously, criticizing this new system, or the government, would quickly have you sent off to the guillotine. But that's not all. Even the most minor offense could have you tried before the Revolutionary Tribunal. Hello, Citizen Martin. Hello, Monsieur Dubois. Monsieur? Did I just hear you say Monsieur? That's the old style of address, my friend. To the guillotine! You know what? I didn't like him, but I do feel kinda bad for the king and his family. Oof, expressing sympathy for the royal family, are we? To the guillotine! 12 sous for a loaf of bread? That's way overpriced. To the guillotine! Man, this bread line is taking forever. To the guillotine! And you look like you're thinking anti-revolutionary thoughts. To the guillotine. Max, we're sending way too many people to the guillotine. To the guillotine! Chop, 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 chop. It was insane. All across France, about 40,000 people were killed for suspected crimes against liberty. Let's say your neighbor won't stop mowing the lawn at 7 in the morning. Well, then all you gotta do is tell the government they've been talking smack about the revolution, and there's a good chance they'll end up in front of the Revolutionary Tribunal. Maybe they'll even be executed, taking a metaphorical load off your shoulders and a literal one off theirs. The most prominent victim of the Reign of Terror was a certain Marie Antoinette, who was finally tried and found
oh my god, an AT-AT.
guilty of treason in 1793. She expected she'd be brought to the guillotine in a royal carriage, fit for a queen. All the Republic could provide for her, however, was a wooden tumbril. At 37 years old, the most hated woman in French history met her end on the 16th of October, 1793. Robespierre had saved the revolution through terror. Internal dissent was being suppressed. The food situation was no longer quite as bad. Even the French military had got its act together again and pummeled the Allies at the Battle of Fleurus. For Danton and his followers, the time was right to try to normalize the French Republic. Hey Robespierre, so we were thinking that since things are finally going better, maybe we should rein in the terror. And while we're on it, we could possibly start taking it easier on the church, and also try to end this costly war. Oh, crap. As time went on, Robespierre seemed to go, for lack of a better term, a bit mental. He was hell-bent on creating what he called a republic of virtue, and for him, this meant amping up the bloodshed even more. Throughout the spring and summer of 1794, executions reached an unprecedented level during a period known as the Great Terror. Even those closest to him found their way to the guillotine if they dared oppose his ideas and actions, and he began alienating himself from the rest of the convention. He created a new deistic religion called the Cult of the Supreme Being, along with the new annual Festival of the Supreme Being.
That's so weird, man. It's just so weird.
Man, I think Robespierre is really starting to lose it. He thinks he's a god or something. Nonsense. Sure, he's gone a little extreme, but he doesn't think he's a god. My children, bathe your immortal souls in the virtue of my republic. Okay, yeah, he's completely lost it. Robespierre's ultimate mistake, however, came on July 26th, when he made a speech to the National Convention, in which he said this: I have in my hand a brand new list of enemies to be sent to the guillotine, and many of you are on this list, but I'm not gonna tell you who yet. What do you think of that? I think we should send Robespierre to the guillotine first. All in favor? Oh, no. 2 days later,
And he shot himself in the cheek. And he tried to commit suicide. Did not fare well. He lived. He had to sit in prison with a gunshot wound to the face. Then this happened.
Robespierre became the final victim of the monstrous terror and paranoia he had created.
He was not the final victim of a guillotine. He was the final victim of this era.
Many historical accounts of the revolution end here with the death of Robespierre and his terror. But the revolution officially continued for another 5 years, until 1799.
Because the real revolution is actually the government that's in state, and it does not really go away until Napoleon and two other individuals become a new 1, 2, 3 consul.
So what happened between now and then? Well, after the fall of Robespierre, a more moderate political group called the Thermidorians took control of the convention. They wanted to restore stability to the government. Now, Robespierre's allies and other radicals who had fueled the terror themselves became the target of political suppression. Bourgeois street fighters took on the radical sans-culottes in the streets during a period named the White Terror. In 1795, the Thermidorians drafted a new constitution and created a government called the Directory, with the purpose of preventing power from being able to fall into the hands of a single individual again. As this new government was being established, royalists who wanted to bring the monarchy back to France saw this moment as an opportunity to strike. They staged an insurrection in Paris and battled with the National Guard in the streets.
Of course, this is where Mr. Bonaparte jumps back in the scene.
Luckily, one Napoleon Bonaparte happened to be in Paris at the time, and he took control of the situation, firing on the crowd and putting down the insurrection. From this moment on, the people of Paris would never again be able to stage a popular uprising and lost their control over the revolution. For his actions, Napoleon became a general and was sent to take control of the French armies in Italy. The new Directory remained a fairly ineffective government for the remainder of the revolution. It was plagued with corruption and struggled to keep the economy afloat, and as a result, wasn't very popular. For the people of France, with the strict social customs of both royalist France and the terror gone, they didn't really know what to do with themselves. Men no longer removed their hats when talking to women, different classes began intermingling, and a publication began circulating that looked a lot like a modern dating app. It was social anarchy. Outside of France, the war continued. In 1795, France took the Netherlands, where they set up a puppet state. Then they negotiated both Prussia and Spain out of the war. The British attempted to land French royalists in the west to reinforce rebellion, but that plan failed. In 1796, the French planned a three-pronged attack with the aim of marching on Vienna and knocking Austria out of the war. The two northern armies were defeated and forced to retreat. However, Napoleon in the south, with groundbreaking military strategy, won battle after battle after battle.
With not as well-trained militia or well-equipped resources either.
He pushed the Austrians out of Italy and began closing in on Vienna. The Austrians freaked out, and Napoleon oversaw the signing of a peace treaty. He had almost single-handedly knocked Austria out of the war, and by the way, he was only 28, so maybe it's about time you moved out of your mom's basement. Napoleon became a famed hero among the French people, but his aspirations were still higher. He briefly went off to Egypt and discovered a bunch of gnarly Egyptian stuff, but then the British destroyed his fleet and trapped his forces. Say, Napoleon, sir, you're not going to leave us here stuck in Egypt and return to France, are you? Nonsense, my boy. I would never dream of abandoning my loyal soldiers. Wow, what's that over there? On his return to Paris, Napoleon found himself to be extremely popular, and the government extremely unpopular, and he started getting some power-hungry ideas. Conveniently, a politician named Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès approached Napoleon and said, "Hey man, since you're so popular, do you want to help me stage a coup?" "Great idea! Let's stage a coup, and then I'll coup you." What? Napoleon, with the help of his politician brother, entered the government chamber, possibly got punched in the face, and finally his troops intimidated the council to dissolve the government and create a new constitution that basically made Napoleon a dictator. So there you have it, the French Revolution, born with the great promise of liberty and equality. The common people dared challenge an oppressive system that had existed for centuries. But before they knew it, they found liberty sidelined by terror, equality that possibly didn't quite hit the mark, and an absolute monarchy replaced by an absolute dictator. Napoleon began stabilizing French society. He restored the Catholic Church and got rid of that crazy calendar, among other things. But he remained ever ambitious. He was France's first consul, but he slept soundly at night dreaming of being something even bigger. Napoleon's expansionist aspirations, combined with the ongoing conflict in Europe, would eventually lead the continent into a huge conflict known today as...
which we'll be getting to very quickly, so hit that subscribe button. But guys, listen real quick. So let's just recap this entire thing. So the French Revolution was very simple. We're just going to oversimplify the simplification right now. Economies just did not go well for France, especially because of how their system was set up economically in terms of a feudalism, classist society. The American Revolution times a lot of other things just really... I can't even think of the word, but it basically made France become a country that was in debt and not just in debt to the wars, but in debt in terms of inflation. Their food lines, the natural occurrences that happen in terms of the weather patterns really, really hurt the poor people, the peasantry. But not just the peasantry. When we think of like the commoners, they're anyone but the clergy. They're anyone but the lords, the nobles, the nobility class itself. Anyone that's not that, like middle class or even upper class individuals, fall in terms of that peasantry side. And if you put human emotion and starvation in the same bucket, you're going to get something like revolution. And this revolution was really just looking at a fairness and equality state. And then we saw, different changes of government, and then the radicalization, and then the beginnings of a media publishing that was not oversalt with, usually if you had like a society today and you had, a commoner people, a lot of times in the free world, we have checks and balances to where if people create media stories, they're not going to be executed. But a lot of times back then, especially in the the late 18th century, you're going to have not those checks and balances. So you're going to have the mob rule. The mob rule took over, and then of course from the mob rule, you get things like Robespierre and other individuals rising to power to make decisions on behalf of the people based off of mob rule and just pure emotion, which of course led to the Reign of Terror, the Great Terror, and the continuation of the guillotine. The guillotine was most likely, it was thought to be almost a merciful killing, and it was more of a scared minority that was projecting the majority to the underwhelming minority of nobility, clergy, and monarchy, which also encompass a religious aspect, making the atheistic ideology more of the norm. Anything that was the old became not to the new. That's why they changed the calendars. That's why they changed social reform. That's why they changed the government, how things worked, what you can and cannot say. And then you lead to all the other monarchies in the countries around France that really just looked upon and did not want the spreaded ideology, but also looked deeply at the individuals that lived in France. And they had citizens that might have been living in France. They had family members that may have been in the nobility, as well as reasonings for like the Prussian and the Austrian king saying you do not kill the king. A lot of these nobles and kings were families that stretched across Europe, and we know this all the way back from stuff like the Habsburgs and other instances that these royal families were not just specifically agnostic to one country, they were more or less the entirety of the continent. This, of course, enraged a lot of individuals because they saw France as much certainty as the end days of the Roman Empire. So it could be a land grab and a power vacuum, and they don't want something happening as it did happen. Eventually, someone named Napoleon Bonaparte rose to the ranks and saw opportunity, took his leap at Toulon, then was awarded the Army of Italy. Army of Italy, along with great administrative work and generals, helped secure peace with Austria, putting down the first coalition. From there, you see a coup d'etat that one of the actual directory leaders met with another directory leader. Those two met with Napoleon, and they devised a coup. So it wasn't like some random people attacking the top. It was more or less a two of the more senior members of the directory working with their sword, which was Napoleon. Napoleon working with a lot of people had to be organized. This was not just a here and there thing. They moved the directory outside, the directory as well as the House of Elders outside of the city. They bring in their own military. They stage the coup. They say that you're dissolved. Then that's when the first, second, and third consul, with the first consul being Napoleon, takes over, and that's where the Napoleonic Wars begin. That's simple. And that's 1799. But Napoleon's story starts way before that. When he becomes a captain, and then he starts with the artillery battery at Toulon, and then he continues through Egypt as becoming a general, and then from there he goes to Egypt, Abukir, he meets Horatio Nelson's fate for his navy. He sees so much more, but we got a lot to talk about for Napoleon. So Yeah, let's go do that. Guys, I'm sorry. I was just spewing at the mouth at this point. I appreciate you watching. Leave a subscription, leave a comment, hit that like button. I appreciate every single one of you, especially you watching this video. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye-bye. It's time to oversimplify. We got the Napoleonic Wars Part 1. Let's just jump into it. Hit that like button. Let go.
Link below and get a huge discount off a 2-year plan with a risk-free 30-day money-back guarantee. Also, why not grab yourself a character pin of the little corporal himself before they sell out? And big shout out to the patrons. Head on over to learn about benefits such as Discord access and maybe even a little behind-the-scenes content. Okay, Mrs. Bonaparte, this is it. One last push and we're done. Congratulations, it's a general. Oh,
no.
And here comes the rest of the army now.
What is this?
Did you just say the rest of the army?
It's the Grand Armée! The cavalry! Oh my god. Here we go.
History is full of great conquerors, many with very impressive origin stories. For example, Alexander the Great was the son of a king. Julius Caesar came from an aristocratic family that descended from a goddess. Great conquerors don't usually come from relatively insignificant families living on impoverished islands.
Corsica!
But as it just so happens, that is where our story begins. In the early 18th century, the island of Corsica was a part of the Republic of Genoa, until one day Corsica said, hey, we're declaring independence, and it's probably not worth your time to try and stop us. So Genoa said, you're right, it isn't worth their time. Hey France, you want to buy this island? And France said, sure thing. And thus, Corsica became France, just in time for Napoleon to be born French. Many Corsicans didn't
Just butterfly effects, guys.
appreciate their new conquerors, however, and from an early age, Napoleon developed some fairly anti-French sentiments. Napoleon's dad, however, quickly embraced his new French overlords, which created some tension between dad and son. Ooh, look at me. I'm dad. I wear powdered wigs and silver-buckled shoes, and I'm a traitor to the Corsican people. Go to
Isn't that just wild that he had such a anti-French sentiment early on?
your room, Napoleon. No, you go to your room, dad. Okay. On the other hand, Napoleon adored his mother, who was definitely the disciplinarian of the family, and even though she would punish Napoleon severely, he kind of respected that. But Napoleon's parents wanted the best for their family, and since they were of very minor nobility, they were able to have Napoleon sent off to the shining lights and rat-infested sewage puddles of the big city. Napoleon went to military school in France. Okay, Napoleon, why don't you introduce yourself to your new classmates? Well, I'm Napoleon, and I hate all of you. Your farts smell like cheese, you can't pronounce the letter R, all you do is go on strike, and you call eggs oofs like a bunch of big dumb idiot dingleberries. Okay. Thanks, Napoleon. I hope you like being bullied. And bullied he was. They picked on him for his Corsican accent, his family's lack of wealth, and it probably didn't help that he also had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. But he could hold his own, and on an average day, might be found dishing out ratatouille sandwiches for breakfast. He spent much of his time alone, and he loved reading about the great conquerors of history. He learned about Julius Caesar, and he wondered if one day he too might have a pizza franchise named after him. He excelled at math and geography, and when he graduated at the age of 16...
And by the way, math and geography is super, I mean, we're going to see it here, but it's super important in terms of the battery, for artillery reasons. Like, you have to understand the trajectory of how far your cannon's going to go, your cannonball is going to go. So the reasonings of him excelling at math and geometry. Did I say geography or geography?
He excelled at math and geography.
Math and geography, but geometry as well. Geography is really important for topography and utilizing positioning and such. So he is exactly what he needs to do. He's doing exactly what he needs to do.
And when he graduated at the age of 16, he was made second lieutenant in an artillery regiment. Now, second lieutenant might sound pretty sweet to a screw-up like you, but Napoleon had a little something called ambition.
Oh yeah.
Stonks of it. And he wasn't content being just some junior officer. He wanted to rise the ranks. Unfortunately for him, that would be a little difficult. Well, Napoleon, I've reviewed your application. It's clear you're very skilled and would be a perfect fit for the promotion. And Simeon, you're just about the biggest idiot I've ever seen. Your test results suggest you have the mental aptitude of a senile earthworm, and in the part of the form where you list your experience, you seem to have drawn a picture of a gerbil giving birth to a shoe. But your dad is the Marquis de la Fufayette, so you get the job. French society was just too closed off. Positions were handed out based on nobility, not talent.
And that's probably why Napoleon had such a, he disagreed with so many decisions, but he also had such an issue with individuals that were not up to the caliber in terms of ingenuity. And he quickly labeled a lot of people, as we've seen in a lot of the martial videos we did, he quickly labeled a lot of his subordinates as not that smart.
And the young Napoleon probably felt stuck. Wouldn't it be nice if, say, a revolution came along and changed all of that? Well, what are the chances? The French Revolution is here. Bastille toppling, head chopping, king popping. The revolution promised to do away with the old social hierarchy and make everyone a little more equal. Napoleon may not have cared much for the violent mobs, but if it meant he could rise the ranks, he was in. He began fighting to defend the revolution. He put down a British-sponsored counter-revolution in Toulon and got promoted. He put down a royalist uprising in Paris and got promoted. And as his military prowess became more recognized, he was even given his very own army. It was astonishing progress for such a young man of humble origins, and Napoleon's wildest dreams were coming true. But Napoleon also believed he could increase his social status if he married an older rich lady. And
Josephine.
so around this time, Napoleon went on the prowl. However, if some sources are to be believed, he was a verified creep. He reportedly had terrible luck with women, and most wanted nothing to do with him. Fortunately, he eventually met Josephine, an aging single mother who was deeply in debt and needed stability, so she agreed to marry him despite finding him intensely disgusting. Napoleon, you dirty dog, you've done it. Unbeknownst to Napoleon, however, Josephine had a bit of a promiscuous reputation. Hey Napoleon, I hear you're marrying Josephine. Boy, she sure is a great kisser. That's right. Hey, wait, what do you mean she's a great kisser? Hey Hugo, you hear Napoleon's marrying Josephine? Wow, she sure is a great kisser. Now hang on just a minute. Hey everyone, Napoleon's marrying Josephine. Oh yeah, she sure is a great kisser. She's real good at kissing. Wow, I'm pretty sure I kissed her just yesterday. For goodness sake, is there anyone here who hasn't kissed my wife? Yeah, you. As Napoleon fell madly in love with his new wife, she fell madly in love with a man named Hippolyte. It wouldn't be long, however, before Napoleon would leave home and go to war, because while France was having its revolution, tensions in Europe were rising.
Italy!
Hey, Austria, you'll never guess what we just did. What's that, France? I got 2 words for you. Revolution. We totally just socked it to our monarchy. What? Dude, the rest of us are monarchies. You've just totally threatened the balance of power in Europe. Now we have to worry about our stinky peasants rising up against us. I mean, holy hell, your queen is... Okay, France, this is pretty awkward. And the rest of Europe is probably itching to give you a wedgie. But you're not ready for a war yet. So you gotta be cool, man. It's absolutely crucial that you say something to defuse the situation right now. Preposterous! I declare war. Sacre bleu! So France ended up at war with basically the rest of Europe, and the War of the First Coalition began. At first, France struggled, but then they started to do surprisingly well, and in many conquered territories, they began to establish sister republics, exporting their revolutionary ideas across Europe. In 1796, they planned a 3-pronged attack to take Vienna and knock Austria out of the war.
Which really would have, it really would take out the entire coalition, just basically because Austria was more or less the brute force of the army that would be invading.
With 2 magnificent armies in the north to kick ass, and Napoleon in the south as a bit of a diversion. For the first time, Napoleon would lead a military campaign. This was his chance to prove himself, to be somebody. And what a general he proved to be. The army he was given were demoralized, lacking equipment, and underpaid. But Napoleon galvanized them with inspirational speeches, and he took them into Italy. He was outnumbered, and his campaign was partially meant to be a sideshow, but he made it the main show. While the 2 northern armies were being held back.
By the way, Archduke Charles, who is the brother, I believe, of the Emperor of Austria, is regarded as one of the best generals of this time, or commanders of this time. So it'd be hard for anyone to really win that Rhineland area in the early part of the war.
Napoleon made staggering progress. In a signature Napoleon move, he masterfully split his enemies into 2 and took them on separately, knocking Sardinia out of the war and putting the Austrians on the run. At the famous Battle of Lodi, he was in the fray, aiming the cannons himself, getting covered in mud, and earning the total respect of his men. They respected him so much that when he ordered an almost suicidal assault on the only bridge in town, his men threw themselves at it and took it despite fierce Austrian resistance. For Napoleon, it was all he needed to confirm that he was the greatest human who had ever existed.
Which this image right here is kind of fictionalized, obviously, a little bit. I mean, there's probable cause that there was a simpler version of this, but at the end of the day, art romanticizes everything.
Wow, Napoleon, you're pretty great at this military stuff. Just be careful your head doesn't get too big. What did you just say to me, you little prick? And as Napoleon swept through northern Italy, the Italians cheered his arrival.
This is Milan.
Yes, I'm here to liberate you from your cruel Austrian oppressors and replace them with French ones.
Oof.
Napoleon plundered as he went, sending riches back to France to help its economy, but also paying his men the first real money they'd seen in years. The Pope had been supporting the Austrians, so Napoleon briefly went to go give him a slap. And as he began to approach Vienna, the exhausted Austrians were forced to make peace, with Napoleon overseeing negotiations himself. He had just single-handedly knocked Austria out of the war. And by the way, he was only 28, so maybe it's about time you moved out of your dad's attic. In the Italian territories he had conquered, Napoleon established new French sister republics, even writing constitutions and organizing governments himself, not something a general generally does. When he got back to France, he was hailed as a hero, and the extremely unpopular government were concerned he might get some power-hungry ideas.
The Directory.
So they agreed he should go far away from France to Egypt.
It's like a soft exile.
Where he could maybe undermine British access to India. Napoleon was eager to win more glory, so he brought with him a team of scholars, and he was like, whoa, it's a freaky man-cat. Whoa.
And this, of course, was the Egyptology. This is really when a lot of Egyptology kind of took off, because not a lot of people knew about this. Of course, this is where they discovered the Rosetta Stone. This is where the pyramids and the mummified culture really comes into play. A lot of people really start to understand and learn about mummies, and even take mummies back home with them and have mummy parties. It gets weird. But the hieroglyphics are starting to be like this butterfly effects into a lot of stuff in terms of academia when it comes to Egyptology, when it comes to hieroglyphics, how the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom existed, the pharaohs, lots of things prior to the Islamic invasions.
Oh, it's a big stick. Whoa, it's an ugly horse. Whoa, it's a stumpy little manlet. Hey, I'm actually average height for the time. But then British Admiral Nelson came down and wrecked his fleet, and an Anglo-Ottoman force defeated him at Acre. So
And like wrecked that fleet, and that was their way home, and they're so far home.
Napoleon abandoned his men and went back to France. His campaign in Egypt hadn't gone quite as planned. But one thing you should know about Napoleon was that he was a skilled propagandist. He published his own newspapers that sometimes exaggerated his achievements, and even commissioned paintings that generally made him look cool. So when he returned to Paris, he was yet again hailed as a hero, and he began to get some power-hungry ideas. First, however, he had a bit of a problem to deal with. See, he had learned something shocking about his dear wife. Really, Josephine? This guy? I'm just as tall as him. I'm sorry, I swear. Now that you're becoming famous, I'll never do it again. Make sure you don't. I've never stooped so low as to cheat on you. Now if you'll
Yes, he has.
excuse me, I'll be in this room consulting my generals for the next 30 minutes. And by consulting, I mean boinking. By my generals, I mean this woman. And by 30 minutes, I mean 2 seconds. Having dealt with his wife, Napoleon was then approached by a very influential politician who said he had an idea.
And this guy, of course, is one of the directors on the Directory.
He wanted to stage a coup against the deeply unpopular government and needed the extremely popular Napoleon's help. And Napoleon thought that was just the darn tootinest idea. The plan was to trap the government and convince them to voluntarily give up their power. And here's how they did it. Hey guys, oh my gosh, quick! There's a dangerous Jacobin plot to overthrow you, which we definitely aren't just making up. Better get inside this cage so we can protect you. Okay. Gentlemen, we got him. In this case, the cage was an isolated palace outside of Paris, with no one around but Napoleon and his army. With the government inside, Napoleon then entered, and a pretty chaotic event ensued, during which the government didn't seem entirely sure what was going on, Napoleon's men didn't seem entirely sure what was going on, and Napoleon himself didn't seem entirely sure what was going on. But thankfully, Napoleon's brother Lucien, president of the lower house, managed to regain control, and the remaining councilmen were intimidated into creating a new constitution. And thus, a new government was formed, this time with 3 consuls in charge.
And the Pierre Ducasse and Joseph Size, they were actually directors on the directory, but they needed a sword, which becomes the first consul, Napoleon.
But after Napoleon did some rewriting, in the end, there was really only one man in charge, the first consul, him. And over the next few years, he worked to consolidate even more power, and essentially became a dictator in total control of France. And by the way, he was only 30, so maybe it's about time you washed your disgusting bedsheets. France was now ruled by possibly the greatest military leader of the time. Possibly the greatest? Or definitely? Well, now was his chance to prove it. See, back when Napoleon was still in Egypt, being Indiana Jones. Back home, France was in France, being France. They had conquered even more territory, and they were like, hey Piedmont, you get revolutionary ideals. Hey Switzerland, you get revolutionary ideals. And Rome, you get revolutionary ideals. Everybody gets revolutionary oh, hey guys.
And they did not like that. That's Great Britain, Austria, and Russia.
Nice sledgehammers. And Naples, very cool nail gun. You
Naples ain't that scary.
guys here to get some revolutionary ideas? As France was still spreading the revolution, and with Napoleon busy in Egypt, the European powers felt the time was right for round 2, and the war of the Second Coalition began. And this time, their big bad boy buddy Russia.
So he's kind of skipping around here before, just so everyone's on the same page. He went to Egypt, then came back, then a coup happened, then he became first consul.
Was here to bang some French boys back to Bordeaux. And bang them, they did. France got blasted. But then Russia pulled out after stalling in Switzerland, and now that Napoleon was in charge of the country, he was ready to start blasting right back. He took command of the Army of the Reserve, and he brought the fight to the Austrians.
So the Alps.
Now, there are many traits that made Napoleon a great military leader. I already mentioned one of them, how he was one of the boys and commanded the total loyalty of his men. But now we see a second reason, the element of surprise. In 1800, Napoleon moved to Geneva, and it looked like he was probably going to take on the Austrian forces in Germany. There's no way he'd be crazy enough to move his entire army south through the Alps as a surprise attack on the Austrians besieging Genoa. Oh, Napoleon's moving his entire army south through the Alps as a surprise attack on the Austrians besieging Genoa. Napoleon's crossing of the Alps is legendary, and you may have seen one of the most famous paintings of the general, popping a sick wheelie on his majestic stallion surrounded by dangerous mountain terrain.
But we can't say that Berthier, one of his eventual marshals, his chief of staff, really helped him with the logistics and administrative work to get through here.
Of course, in real life, he made the crossing on a depressed mule, but that's not as cool. When he emerged in Italy, the Austrians expected him to come break their siege, but Napoleon went for their supply line near Milan, forcing the Austrians to meet Napoleon head-on at the famous Battle of Marengo. The Austrians initially clobbered the outnumbered French, and they were like, hooray, we won. But then a few hours later, Napoleon showed up again with an even bigger army, and he clobbered them right back. Holy cow, this tiny little fun-sized French guy is running rings around us.
Hey! I'm average height for the time, you jerk!
Then, after General Moreau's victory at Hohenlinden, Vienna was exposed, and the Austrians again sued for peace. Just like the War of the First Coalition, the Second Coalition ended in another French victory. But in many ways, they both felt more like Napoleon victories. Only the UK remained at war with Napoleon, and they were using their powerful navy to blockade French ports and were even seizing the cargoes of neutral ships.
Yeah, that's gonna make Napoleon hate Great Britain and create a continental system that we'll see in a soon.
Obviously, everyone else got pretty pissed off that the British were interfering with their trade, so in response, they formed a league, and they embargoed the UK right back. Neutral countries protecting their own interests? That's offensive. So Britain went to Copenhagen and blew a bunch of stuff up, and the league disbanded. But because the UK's economy was pretty bust, they decided to sign a treaty with France in 1802. For the first time in a long time, Europe was at peace. Congratulations, sire. You've achieved peace. Yes, Pierre, but not for long. I still don't trust those dirty Brits. Did you hear they've been calling me the Bony Man? What does that even mean? Keep an eye on them, would you? I can't, sire. Why not? Because they use NordVPN. Is that possible? Manage to search Oversimplified. Head up to Capcom. Can't. That's the channel. So thank you. Now where were we? Oh yeah. Crossing the Alps, defeating the Austrians, and Europe at peace.
For now.
What a meteoric rise it had been for the young Corsican. He had just taken charge of a nation that appeared to be losing a war and turned it all around, securing French gains in Europe. But there was now a big question. You see, throughout the chaotic French Revolution, French governments had struggled to keep the economy afloat. They often didn't have a whole lot of support, and they frequently came and went. Would Napoleon finally be the man who could stick around? Military victories were one thing, but could the general also govern? Spoiler alert. Yes. The economy's crumbling? Well then why don't you have yourself a new national bank, currency reform, and improved taxation and welfare systems? The legal system is an incoherent mess? Well then why don't we nicely wrap all those civil laws up into one new centralized legal code? Corrupt government officials? Throw them in the trash. Bad infrastructure? Throw it in the trash. Women's rights? Throw them in the trash. Wait,
God.
Really? Well, yeah, unfortunately, while Napoleon was building on the equality of the revolution, he also largely scaled back rights for certain groups, and husbands had full legal control over their wives. But come on, ladies, maybe let men have a slice of the pie for once, okay? Napoleon further reformed education, ensuring a system based on individual ability, meaning now Simeon had to compete with everyone else, and Napoleon could get the cream of the crop to help him run the republic. But he wasn't just building on the ideas of the revolution. The revolution had led to a lot of chaos, and Napoleon needed stability. So he rolled back a couple things, most notably with religion. The revolution had pretty much kicked the Catholic Church to the curb, but Napoleon understood that since many French citizens still considered themselves Catholic, that could be a problem. So he came to an agreement with the Pope and brought back the Church, only this time with some pretty hefty power limitations. He also ensured freedom for other religions, and is often noted for his positive treatment of Jewish people at a time of widespread anti-Semitism. But while all of this may make Napoleon sound like a pretty stand-up dude, it's good to note that he believed in religious freedom because he thought it was a powerful tool to keep the poor from eating the rich. Or something like that. Overall, Napoleon's aim was to end the chaos of the revolution and finally create a stable and prospering French republic. And in that aim, he seemed to be largely successful and generally popular with the people of France. He officially declared that the revolution is over, adding, "I am the revolution." Napoleon's head could be seen for miles. Of course, not everyone was happy with Napoleon's reforms. Conservatives felt he was too radical. Radicals felt he was too conservative. But since Napoleon
That's a good Goldilocks, though, to be.
was a dictator, opposition could usually be stamped out with some good old-fashioned iron fisting. In 1804, Napoleon took one last major step. After some failed attempts were made to assassinate him, he wanted to strengthen his position and ensure his dynasty could live on after him. And so he decided being first consul for life simply wasn't quite enough. He decided he should become emperor. He held a vote, asking the French people if they were cool with the idea, and they returned a definitely not rigged 99.9% in favor. The ball's on this man. And so on the 2nd of December, 1804, in an elaborate ceremony at Notre Dame, Napoleon was made emperor. The Pope was even invited to attend, and normally he would crown an emperor. But to make sure everyone knew this wasn't some Charlemagne-style circular power division, Napoleon lifted the crown and placed it on his own head. Like I said, the ball's on this man. He was now Emperor of the French.
The French, not just France, the French states.
Well, Napoleon, you were a general, then you became first consul for life, and now you're an emperor. Is it enough yet?
No.
Is your ambition finally satisfied? I don't know, Pierre. What comes after emperor? I would say god, sire. You want to be a god? Yes. I'll put it down under maybe. Okay, everyone. What the hell is going on? This Corsican guy showed up out of nowhere, and he's kicking our ass. He's exporting the ideas of the French Revolution wherever he goes, and he just declared himself King of Italy and Emperor. He can't do that. I'm the Emperor. Oh, hey, fellow monarchs. I see you're having a monarch party. My invite must have got lost in the mail. I'll just set up a spot right here. Wow. You don't belong here, Napoleon. We're coming to take you down. I'd like to see you try. Oh, I'm so scared I just pooed my pants. Hey, everyone, I just pooed my pants. No, but I did just poo my pants. Before Napoleon had even declared himself emperor, the British had already redeclared war on France because both sides had been violating their previous treaty. Napoleon immediately occupied Hanover and then began making plans for a great British invasion.
Which would have only been able to happen if Spain was able to help destroy the fleet of Great Britain.
Partially paid for by selling a huge chunk of land to the United States. Napoleon gathered his army along the English Channel. But here was the problem. While Napoleon's powerful army would almost certainly obliterate the British on land, there was very little chance he'd actually make it across the Channel, because Britannia ruled the waves. This power dynamic would keep the two traditional enemies from engaging in much real direct combat throughout the Napoleonic Wars. However, the British had something else up their sleeve: copious amounts of money.
And they proxied every single state in Europe.
They were willing to throw cash at anyone who would go to war against Napoleon, and there were plenty of takers. Austria, Russia, Naples, and Sweden, hoping to put Napoleon's France back in its place, formed the Third Coalition against France.
And notice Spain and some of the French states are allies this time.
Coalition forces probably thought that this time they stood a chance. They weren't prepared for the total humiliation they were about to suffer. The War of the Third Coalition was Napoleon at his best. We've already learned two ways in which Napoleon was a great military commander, but here comes one of the biggest reasons: speed. He had reorganized his army into corps, which were themselves basically small armies. Each had their own infantry, cavalry, and artillery, and as a result, was able to act more independently. They spread out through the countryside, and by living off the land rather than relying on heavy supply trains, they were able to move extremely quickly. Napoleon would traverse massive distances, outmaneuver his enemies, isolate them, and then move in for the kill before they even knew what was going on. Lightning warfare leading to total destruction. Would you like to see him do it? Here we go. Part of the coalition's plan was for the Russians to meet up with the Austrians and take on Napoleon together.
Mr. Mac. Mr. Mac. We're gonna see them first.
Combined, they could turn the tide against him, so Napoleon needed to stop them from ever meeting. But he's all the way over in Boulogne. No problem. In a matter of weeks, Napoleon marched 200,000 men, in secret, encircling Austrian General Mack and capturing his entire army. A devastating blow. Napoleon later remarked, "I have destroyed the Austrian army by simply marching." Next, he turned to face the approaching Russians. Okay, it looks like the French are coming for us, but check this out. I've got an amazing idea. When they approach, we run away. Sir, you're a genius. The Russians began to retreat with Napoleon giving chase, and since his tactics relied on quick victories, this could be a problem, especially because the longer the war went on, the more likely it looked other countries may join the coalition against him. But Napoleon knew the Russian Tsar, Alexander I, was young and seeking glory, so he came up with an idea to lure him in. He sent him a message. What does it say? It says, "Hello, I'm just a little baby boy, and I'm very scared." Are you talking like that, or is he? He is, sir. Why is he doing that? I don't know, but it's very cute, helpless, and vulnerable. A little baby boy, eh? Very scared, eh? Cute, eh? Boris, get my crossbow. We're going hunting. The Allied forces turned to face Napoleon, who they now believed was in a vulnerable
I think this is Austerlitz.
position. He was set up at Austerlitz, and to make it look like he was retreating, he had even evacuated the high ground. A thick fog set in, obscuring Napoleon's center, as the Allies took the bait and set up on the heights. From there, they spotted Napoleon's very weak-looking right flank, and they descended the heights to go get it. Little did they know, it was exactly what Napoleon was hoping they'd do. The next thing they knew, a large French force was emerging from the fog, launching a huge central assault up the hill. They swung around, crushing the Allies, and as men attempted to flee across the frozen lakes, Napoleon ordered his artillery to fire on the ice, causing an unknown number to drown. But he told me he was just a little baby boy. What happened? He tricked you, sir. You mean I was the little baby boy all along? It was
He didn't kill him.
Napoleon's masterpiece, and Austria were once again forced to make peace with France. Then, with the French conquest of Naples in 1806, the War of the Third Coalition ended as yet another Napoleon victory.
Probably his best fighting.
This was the third time Napoleon had had to give Austrian Emperor Francis a good spanking. And so, with the peace treaty in 1805, Napoleon was determined to punish him. He was forced to give up territory, hand over significant compensation, and promised never to fight Napoleon again. For now, Russia, Sweden, and the UK remained at war with France, but none were able to offer much of a threat. And so, Napoleon got to work strengthening his grip over Europe. He gave out rule of captured territories to his family and friends, and most notably, he established a new confederation in Germany, with himself as its protector. Seeing his influence in Germany being wiped away, Emperor Francis acknowledged reality and officially dissolved the Holy Roman Empire, an entity that had existed for over 1,000 years. But it wasn't all good news for Napoleon. For one thing, Spain had earlier allied with France in 1804 because the British just couldn't help themselves from blowing up Spanish ships, and Napoleon hoped a combined French-Spanish fleet would eventually be able to invade England. Unfortunately, he received word that British Admiral Nelson had engaged his fleet at Trafalgar. Normally, naval battles looked like this, but in this case, Nelson did this. Was it because he was an idiot? No. It's because he was a genius. He successfully punched through the Franco-Spanish line and unleashed hell.
Broadside.
His victory ensured British control of the sea, and his death during the battle made him a legend. Napoleon's hopes for a future British invasion were gone. But not just that. Napoleon was also hoping to secure peace on the continent, but that wasn't looking likely because the Prussian king was under pressure from his wife. Frederick, he's established a confederation in our turf, and he told us he'd give us Hanover, but then offered it to the British. You have to declare war on him. What is it with you and war? What is it with you and being a cupcake? Go to war! Okay. In October 1806, Prussia, with its famed military tradition, joined the coalition and declared war, beginning the War of the Fourth Coalition.
Here we go.
Unfortunately, Prussian King Frederick William III wasn't the smartest tool in the shed. Look at him over there, being all French. Makes me sick. Boys, we'll get him this time. But here's the thing. This time, we have to stick together. Do not under any circumstances face Napoleon by yourself. You all saw what happened to Austria. Hey, where'd Fred go? Hey, you jerk. Think you're some kind of big shot? Huh? Want to tangle with Fred? You don't got the cojones. We're screwed. Without consulting its allies, Prussia had gone ahead and sent Napoleon an ultimatum, demanding he move all his forces out of Germany. Now, some of you watching this video probably can't even wipe your own bum yet, but even you know, you don't just send Napoleon an ultimatum. Obviously, Napoleon went in for the kill. Prussia's army was quite outdated, so when they met Napoleon at the twin battles of Jena and Auerstedt, it wasn't even close. Even Marshal Davout's heavily outnumbered corps at Auerstedt sent the Prussians running, and Napoleon carried out a ruthless pursuit of his fleeing enemy, taking Berlin and within a single month decimating the Prussian forces.
That wasn't enough for them to sue for peace either. They just kept wanting more, and Russia's going to come into it next.
Frederick William and the remnants of his army moved to the east. At this point, Napoleon's forces were pretty tired. Winter had come, and conditions were miserable. He anticipated both sides would settle into winter quarters.
Oh, we're about to get Eylau and Friedland next.
But Russia decided to try their hand at an unexpected winter attack. A series of brutal battles followed that took a heavy toll on both sides, including the vicious Battle of Eylau, fought in blizzard conditions. Men froze to death, and many deserted. The Russian artillery tore the French to shreds, and Napoleon himself was momentarily under risk of being captured. In the end, the French army was saved thanks to a legendary cavalry charge by Napoleon's flamboyant cavalry commander, Murat. After the horror inflicted on both sides, they decided it might be a good idea not to do any more fighting until after winter. Then, after winter came, and the fighting continued. The Russians were pushed back to Friedland, where Russian General Bennigsen made a bit of a blunder by positioning himself with the Aller River to his back.
And we saw this at Austerlitz, or did we see it at Austerlitz? I think we saw it at Austerlitz. No, we didn't see it at Austerlitz. We saw this in, I think it was the Italian campaign, that when they overreach and they go where there's water to your back, it's just never going to end well.
The French artillery were able to pin the Russians between the river and their concentrated gunfire, a major element in Napoleon's fighting style, and many Russians drowned as they tried to escape. War of the Fourth Coalition. Victory, Napoleon.
That is insane, isn't it? Just like continual see W, 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 W. Napoleon was not messing around there. Like those first four coalitions, probably some of the craziest, most aspirationalist like achievements I've ever seen when it comes to military involvement. Russia's military, they're not as what would you say, experienced as the French military was, by regards of being able to utilize tactics like Napoleon set out, and the core system's going to be copycatted. A lot of Napoleon's his tactics are going to be copycatted by Prussia, by Russia. Alexander really starts to fall in love with Napoleon's way of war. So, you know, we got 3 more coalitions to go. I appreciate you guys. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, leave a like. Peace out. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Welcome back, guys. This is part 2 of Napoleonic Wars Oversimplified. I'm glad you're here with me. As always, I always say, leave a like, leave a comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, but let's just jump into it and learn a little bit more about history, shall we? Lego.
Possible by Honey. Install now for free using the link below and start saving money when you shop online.
It's getting real.
After the Third and Fourth Coalition Wars, Napoleon had decisively defeated all 3 of his main rivals on the continent, and he was now undoubtedly the master of Europe. After the Battle of Friedland, his enemies sued for peace, and they all met on a raft on a river for negotiations. They had been fighting for the past 4 years, but now Napoleon and Alexander surprisingly got along like a house on fire. They laughed together, they chatted long into the night, they kissed. The two had a lot of mutual respect, and Napoleon even told his wife that if Alexander were a woman, I would make him my mistress.
So weird, man.
Kind of a weird thing to say to your wife, Napoleon. In the end, they came to an amicable agreement. Russia would lose barely any land, and in return, they'd join France against the UK and invade Sweden. Win-win. On the other hand,
also, they would basically not trade with Great Britain with the continental system, where the continental system allowed for no country in Europe to trade with Great Britain because Great Britain was the thorn in the side of Napoleon. A little Spain.
Frederick William III was sidelined, and Prussia lost an enormous amount of territory to French client states. Only the UK remained as the last major threat to Napoleon, and they continued to be a big thorn in his side, constantly
I didn't rewatch that. That is hilarious.
funding his enemies and using their powerful navy to wreak havoc on French trade and overseas colonies. But what could Napoleon do? The British were safe across the channel. Well, he said, if I can't fight you with guns, I'll fight you with money. Earlier in 1806, Napoleon had announced the Continental System, a total shutoff of the UK from continental trade. No one in Europe was to trade with Britain, and Napoleon hoped that by hitting their economy, he could force them to negotiate. The British economy did take a hit, and they responded in their typical fashion, by going to Copenhagen and blowing a bunch of stuff up. But in general, the British managed to stay afloat by simply increasing their trade with other parts of the world. Many neutral countries found themselves stuck between a rock and a hard place as the 2 European superpowers demanded they cease trade with the enemy. Hey America, you better not trade with the French or else I'll come burn down the White House. What? This is gonna wreck my economy. I need to start saving money. How the heck am I gonna start saving money? Yeah, that's right. You know where this is going.
Oh,
Do you like shopping and told you to a promo and 100 you daily for to yeah, sick of being blown up for doing almost nothing and under significant pressure from Napoleon, the Danish officially sided with France. But Napoleon's blockade had the biggest effect on continental Europe, who were now cut off from a major trading partner, one that controlled the seas and held a rich, growing empire.
Yeah, so like any of these countries really are going to have, they're going to hurt too because a lot of their imports come from Great Britain. Meaning a lot of their purchases and their goods that they're getting into their country that they would never, like tea, sugar, coffee, etc., 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 you just name it, are actually coming from the New World, but being middleman by the UK because the UK usually owns those colonies in that trade system mercantilely. Mercantilely is not a word, but you know what I mean.
And a lot of countries didn't fully comply. Portugal,
Russia.
a traditional British ally, refused to take part. No problem. Napoleon sent an army and invaded. But it wasn't just Portugal. Many of Napoleon's allies were also suspect. Your Majesty, it seems that Spain isn't properly enforcing your blockade. Spain? Why not? Well, it appears they've been trying to find a way out of being your ally since they lost their fleet at Trafalgar. What is with these people? It's almost like everyone's only pretending to be my ally because they know otherwise I'd beat them up. Do I even have any real friends? Are you my friend, Pierre? Say yes or I'll slap you. Napoleon had come to mistrust his ally to the south, and in particular, Napoleon thought the Spanish royal family were an incompetent mess. Alright, Carlos, you've got to get it together. How can I trust you when all you do is go hunting? Meanwhile, you let this ambitious nobody who dislikes me run the country, and you seem to be the only person in the universe who doesn't realize he's boinking your wife. And what's worse... Who the heck are you? I'm the king's son. I just overthrew my dad. So, actually, now I'm the king. You people are the biggest cluster of shameless, narcissistic idiots and all around just the worst people I've ever met. Here, have a Kid's Choice Award. French forces, many having conveniently already entered Spain to invade Portugal, occupied Spanish forts, and Napoleon invited the Spanish royals to France to help mediate their differences.
All
right, we're here with the royal family of Spain. So, Fernando, you've been accused of plotting against your father and vying for the Spanish throne. What do you have to say for yourself? Well, Napoleon, that's great. Well, I've got the test results right here. Fernando, in the case of the Spanish throne, you are not the king. And Carlos, you are also not the king.
Get my brother in here.
I'm the king.
Actually, his brother becomes the king, Joseph.
Actually, Napoleon made his brother the king, but for all intents and purposes, Spain was now his puppet. He expected the Spanish people to be over the moon at the removal of their unpopular royal family.
Oh yeah, they're just gonna accept you guys, invading their country, besieging their towns, taking away their monarchy, and giving it to their own. Sure.
Imagine his surprise when it turned out that people don't really like to be subjugated by a foreign power, least of all one who had previously attacked the Catholic Church. And so the people of Spain revolted.
Almost feels like a religious war.
Brutal fighting broke out as bands of armed Spaniards ambushed French troops across the kingdom, and vicious atrocities were committed on both sides. In addition to fighting the regular Spanish and Portuguese forces, the French had to contend with tens of thousands of guerrilla fighters.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm way ahead of you guys. Yeah, you got the guerrillas, you got Portugal, you got the Spanish regulars, and then you're gonna have we're gonna meet Mr. Wellesley very soon, the Duke of Wellington in the future. We're gonna meet the British, because the British are going to see this as an opportunity to jump in, because Spain was probably one of the most formidable places in the side of Napoleon, almost as much as Russia in the summer and winter and the invasion of Russia. Like, besides Russia, Spain was probably one of the worst places for Napoleon's army. They just didn't, marshals and generals who were super great in Italy and Germany just fell on their face. You're gonna see Spain with just guerrilla warfare, some lackluster Portuguese and Spanish armies, and with the help of a proxy of money from Great Britain, as well as Great Britain's own boots on the ground, you're gonna see a horrendous campaign in Spain.
Throughout the Spanish countryside, the British even took the opportunity to land an army led by the future Duke of Wellington. And now, British forces were defeating French ones on land. Napoleon briefly went to Spain in person, and he did drive back the Allied armies, but before long, his attention was needed elsewhere.
Russia.
The whole thing became a nightmare for the emperor. He excelled at traditional warfare, but this was something more akin to Napoleon's Vietnam. The whole conflict would keep hundreds of thousands of French soldiers and resources bogged down for years. Napoleon was never able to break the will of the Spanish people, and this problem weakened his position in Europe. Hey, Francis. Want to go to war with Napoleon again? Oh, I don't know, Britain. He's already whomped me 3 times. I'll give you £1 bazillion. Well, okay. Seeing that Napoleon was now caught up in Spain, and with some British funding, Austria decided maybe, just maybe, this time, they'd have a chance. So did they? No. Napoleon defeated them in just 4 months. It was quick, but it wasn't exactly easy. The Austrians had been watching Napoleon and learning, and they had made some reforms, while Napoleon, after years of war, was increasingly having to rely on inexperienced conscripts. So this time, the Austrians gave him a run for his money. The Fifth Coalition saw some of the bloodiest battles to date, including Napoleon's first major defeat, and when he did finally defeat the Austrians at the Battle of Wagram, it was a very costly victory. Still, Napoleon had yet again kicked Francis's butt, and as part of the peace terms, Austria lost a bunch more land. Not long after, however, Napoleon and Francis came to another agreement. It was decided that Napoleon would marry Francis's young daughter.
Can you imagine you lose a battle and then you have to give up your daughter?
But wait, doesn't Napoleon already have a wife? Well, yes, he did. Josephine and Napoleon had become quite fond of one another, but now that Napoleon was playing the monarch game, he needed a male heir, and his aging wife wasn't giving him one, so it was out with the old and in with the new. At least he didn't behead anyone. For Austria, they felt that if Napoleon was going to keep on winning, they may as well be on his side. So through the marriage, Napoleon got an alliance with Austria and a beautiful baby potato. Between the failing blockade against Britain, the ongoing war in Spain, and now his recent struggles in Austria, cracks in Napoleon's invincibility were beginning to show. But still, look at this map. So blue, so beautiful, Even Sweden, after being pulverized by Russia, overthrew their king, and after an interesting chain of events, ended up putting one of Napoleon's own marshals in charge. Marshal.
That's so freaking crazy, isn't it, guys? That Bernadotte becomes the king of the North. The king of the North. Game of Thrones reference. Bernadotte becomes the king of Sweden. And, you know, obviously you guys do any history research. Bernadotte is still the name of the throne to this day. And this guy was one of the beginning marshals of the Napoleonic Wars. Fought against Napoleon in the future, but with Napoleon previously.
Marshal Bernadotte took the name Karl Johan and became Crown Prince of Sweden after agreeing to join Napoleon's continental system. For now, Sweden was Team France. Napoleon was on top of the world. He had won an endless string of victories. All he had to do now was sit back and not make any major miscalculations that could completely turn the tide of war. So let's see what comes next.
Yeah.
France's alliance with Russia was a terrifying prospect. Together, the two could have been unstoppable, but unfortunately, the alliance didn't last. The Russians felt they weren't getting a fair deal. Napoleon's Duchy of Warsaw right on their doorstep was a bit of an insult, and then their economy began to tank because of Napoleon's British blockade. And eventually, they began to open up trade. Your Majesty, it seems Alexander is no longer abiding by the continental system and has begun trading with the British. Alexander? But he kissed me. He kissed you? You wouldn't get it, Pierre. No one would ever kiss you. The security of Napoleon's empire depended on removing the British threat, and he wasn't happy with Russia's backdoor shenanigans. And so in 1812, Napoleon decided to go to war.
And he's about to put together a whole mess of people, like 600,000 individuals.
He gathered together the most massive army Europe had ever seen, made up of troops from every corner of his empire, and he prepared to invade. Okay, it looks like Napoleon's coming for us. Generals, I need ideas. We could stand and fight. No, that's stupid. You're stupid. We could run away. You're a star. You'll remember Napoleon's tactics relied on astonishing speed to outmaneuver his enemy and force a quick, decisive battle. Well, I've got two words for you. Scorched earth. If his opponent retreated while scorching the earth, his men couldn't live off the land. And if his men couldn't live off the land, he needed his supply trains. And if he needed his supply trains, he couldn't move quickly. And if he couldn't move quickly, he couldn't outmaneuver his enemy. And if he couldn't outmaneuver his enemy, I think you get the point.
And then you're going to have those supply trains be threatened by Cossacks, which are like specialist horse units, specialist cavalry units of Russia. And they're going to play almost like how Spain was playing the guerrilla warfare system, but be a little bit more on the skirmish side. And you're going to play a continuous scorched earth method with continuous threats by the Cossacks, leaving a horrendous path to victory. How do you win when you never fight the enemy?
Napoleon launched his invasion and hoped for a quick battle, but all he could do was try to catch the retreating Russians while moving deeper and deeper into hostile territory. And
the one thing they failed to mention here is Eugene, who is his stepson, was actually in charge of massive units here as well. A little bit more of nepotism. As he went, the horribly hot summer devastated his army. His men died of heat, exhaustion, and disease. Supplies began to run out, and his men began to starve. Many deserted, and still the Russians continued to retreat. Numerous times Napoleon considered turning back, but that little voice in his head kept on telling him, keep going, just a little further. And don't worry, you're definitely average height for the time. He nearly caught the Russians at Smolensk, but it was his birthday, so he had a party instead. When he finally reached Moscow, he predicted the Russians wouldn't be willing to give up such a historic and holy city without a fight. And he was right. The Russians finally turned to face him for the single deadliest day of the Napoleonic Wars, the Battle of Borodino. The Russians fought valiantly, and as he got older, Napoleon's battle tactics seemed to become a little less refined and a little more run straight at the enemy, try not to die. He launched a full frontal assault at the Russian defenses, and as a result, the death toll was colossal. The Russians eventually decided to retreat, leaving Moscow to fall into Napoleon's hands. Quick, the French are taking the city. Release all these prisoners immediately, and tell them to burn it to the ground. Well, Jimmy the arsonist, you are not going to believe your luck. Moscow went up in flames, and as Napoleon entered, it became very clear his army wouldn't be able to stay there very long. But he had just defeated the Russian army and taken their most beloved city. In his mind, he had won.
So he sent
Which was not the capital, obviously. The capital was St. Petersburg.
Tsar Alexander in St. Petersburg a letter. Your Imperial Majesty, Napoleon requests your surrender. How shall I respond? You shan't, Dmitri. Ever? Ever. But, Your Majesty, it will be winter soon. The French forces are stuck 500 miles into Russian territory with dwindling supplies. If we don't say anything, well, then they'll all die. Oh! After waiting for a response for about a month, the first snow of winter began to fall, and Napoleon sensed the catastrophe that was about to unfold. He decided their only choice now was to get out. And that's when it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. His glorious invasion had just become a race for survival. As the Russians realized the French were fleeing for their lives, they began to close in on their supply line. Men froze to death, their horses as well. There was starvation and disease. The injured and dying could only be left by the side of the road, as it was too slow to try to carry them. And all along the way, the dreaded Russian Cossacks stalked the bleeding French army, and every now and then swept in for a quick attack. Napoleon, fearing capture, kept a vial of poison around his neck. At one point, the Russian armies nearly trapped him against the Berezina River, but a little Napoleon cleverness gave him the old Geoffrey juke, tricking them into thinking he was going south and then escaping across rapidly built pontoon bridges.
Yeah, like there was tons of them, by the way, not just like a singular area.
To the north. When the Russians realized where he was and began to close in,
They already set up a vanguard and then they blew up the bridge.
French burned the bridges before everyone could cross. Hundreds drowned, and thousands were captured. At this point, Napoleon got wind of plots against him forming in Paris, so he abandoned his men and went back to France. The remaining French stragglers made it across the border. It's been estimated over 600,000 men went into Russia. Less than 100,000 returned. Napoleon was now...
Most of them died, by the way, not through combat, but through disease. Most of them died in the summer. Most of them died dysentery, disease, heat, etc. A lot of people died still in combat, but most of them died to disease.
In a very precarious situation. His army had just been obliterated, and the other European leaders smelled blood. Here was an opportunity to take advantage of a weakened Napoleon, regain territory and influence, and liberate Europe from his dirty French paws. And so, they began to turn. Prussia soon broke their alliance and switched sides, while Austria declared neutrality. Even Sweden, led by one of Napoleon's old marshals, joined the Allies, partly due to Napoleon's earlier invasion of Swedish Pomerania. The War of the Sixth Coalition had begun. The coalition forces had been reforming their armies, and they were now much better. And the UK had also significantly amped up its financial aid to its continental allies. Their armies quickly advanced through Poland and into Germany. In Paris, Napoleon was understandably freaking out. He needed to put together a new army fast, and he called up over 100,000 new conscripts, mostly teenagers. He also put his factories into overdrive, and he was like, you, make more rifles. You, build new cannons. You, make more horses. I don't make horses. Then who makes horses? Horses make horses. Explain how. Well, when a daddy horse and a mommy horse love each other very much. Yes, go on. Well, then the daddy horse... I'm sorry, Napoleon. You're 43. I thought you'd know this stuff. Don't touch me. I'm gonna be sick. As it turned out, Napoleon's lack of...
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Horses would take the biggest toll on his army, since his tactics relied on speed, maneuverability, and destruction. When he took the fight to the Allies in 1813, he did defeat them and sent them running. But lacking cavalry, he was unable to effectively pursue and destroy. He needed horses. For the Allies, being defeated in battle by a man whose army was now full of inexperienced conscripts was concerning. So both sides were like, hold up, time out. The Allies were somewhat cornered, and had Napoleon kept going, it's possible he could have won. But instead he agreed to a brief truce with the Austrians mediating between the two sides. When Austria demanded Napoleon make major concessions, Napoleon told them to shove it. Having had their terms rejected, Austria felt now they were justified in saying, well, we tried, and they joined the coalition. Okay everyone, look at us. The boys are back together. But Napoleon is still dangerous, so we need a plan. Any ideas? Ooh, I know. No, forget it. That's stupid. Oh, no. I've got it! When he approaches, we run away. Genius. He's a genius. The plan was as follows.
Basically what he means is let's not face Napoleon. Let's take down his marshals one at a time. Let's not try to engage Napoleon directly. Let's do what he does to us.
Wherever Napoleon advanced, whoever he advanced on would avoid battle, allowing the others to sweep in from the sides and attack the French marshals guarding his flanks. Essentially, the plan was, don't try to fight Napoleon. And this plan worked tremendously. The Allies scored a number of victories that saw Napoleon move back to the city of Leipzig, where he would make one last major stand as the Allied armies converged in on him from all sides. The stage was set for the biggest and bloodiest battle of the Napoleonic Wars, the Battle of Leipzig. Almost 500,000 troops from over a dozen nations stretched across the battlefield. The French found themselves fighting on all sides for 4 days against the Austrians, Prussians, Swedes, and Russians. It's no wonder this battle is also sometimes referred to as the Battle of the Nations. The French fought ferociously, but ultimately were no match for the coordinated efforts of the coalition. At one point, in the midst of battle, Saxon troops allied with the French had a team huddle and were like, "Hey guys, I'm pretty sure the French are losing. Let's switch sides." And so they did. When it became clear that Napoleon couldn't win, he ordered a retreat across the only bridge over the river. The Allies swarmed into the city, and desperate fighting raged in the streets. "Okay, Corporal, after everyone has crossed the river, I need you to blow up the bridge." "Okay? Not before everyone's crossed. After."
Oh, no.
"You got that?" "Yes, Colonel, I'm not 5. I can comprehend time." "Good." Wait, did he say before or after? Well, fortune favors the bold. The bridge was blown early, and 30,000 French troops were stranded and captured. A disaster. And with that, the dominoes were beginning to come crashing down on Napoleon. In the south, an army under the British Duke of Wellington had been pushing the French out of Spain for the past few years, and were now crossing into France. Austrian armies had pushed into Italy, while Napoleon's old flamboyant cavalry commander, Murat, who Napoleon had made king of Naples, decided to switch sides. German states, many resentful after years under Napoleon's thumb, turned against him, and the Confederation of the Rhine collapsed. Bernadotte invaded Denmark, and they were forced to join the coalition, while the Netherlands were liberated. You'd think Napoleon might have seen the writing on the wall, but he was Napoleon, and so instead, he prepared to keep fighting. As attitudes in Paris were already beginning to turn against him, he called up more conscripts to defend the exhausted nation. As for the Allies, they weren't sure exactly what they were aiming for here. A few peace offers were floated that may have let Napoleon keep his position, but the British kept throwing around even more money, and eventually, they all agreed that the ultimate aim was the deposition of Napoleon entirely. And so, Napoleon embarked on one of his most famous campaigns to defend the homeland.
Battle of France.
He was completely outnumbered, but the Allied armies had split up and spread out. His army was so small that he could move at lightning speed, and he used this to his advantage. In the famous 6 Days campaign against Prussian General Blücher, he attacked from all directions and defeated Blücher's forces 4 times, only suffering a tenth of the casualties he inflicted. Even with his back completely to the wall, Napoleon was still Napoleon. Then he turned south to take on Schwarzenberg's army of Bohemia and enjoyed even more victories. However, Napoleon's problem was that he couldn't be everywhere at once, and wherever he wasn't, the Allies continued to push towards Paris. He made one last-ditch attempt at moving in behind the enemy lines and cutting off their communications, but Paris was in disarray, and the people were sick of war. One ambitious and slightly treacherous politician sent the Allied armies a letter basically saying, "Hey guys, come on in."
Yeah, Talleyrand basically invited everyone in, saying, "Hey, you come in, we will welcome you in," and there's no one defending, really.
And so, they did. The city's defenders surrendered, and as the Allied leaders entered Paris, the people cheered them as bringers of peace. Paris had fallen. "Quick, marshals, gather your men. We're gonna launch an assault on Paris." "Where are my marshals?" "They all left, and told me to give you this note." Napoleon's marshals had realized what he hadn't. It was over, and they insisted all that was left now, for the good of France, was for him to abdicate. And without the support of his army, Napoleon had no choice. He hoped his son could take his place, but it was decided instead to restore the old Bourbon monarchy. Old King Louis XVI's brother would become the King of France. It was almost like the French Revolution had never even happened.
Oh, it happened.
But what will we do with Napoleon? We can't have a hyperactive 44-year-old menace running around reigniting revolutionary ideals and plotting his return. Well, why don't we send him, I don't know, there. The location chosen for Napoleon's exile was the small island of Elba, just off the coast of Italy. Napoleon was to rule over the island, and even got to keep the title Emperor of Elba. The Allies must have been in stitches when they came up with that. When he learned what his fate was to be, he drank the poison he had been keeping around his neck. But it had gone out of date, so instead of a quick and painless death, he got a painful stummy-wummy instead. Before he left France, he addressed his oldest and closest guard one last time, making an emotional speech that ended with him kissing their flag. And off he went to exile.
That's it. Or is it?
The deal that was given to him was actually quite generous. His family were given titles, he was to receive a state pension from France, and he was able to receive many distinguished visitors, all eager to come and meet the famed emperor. And he ruled over Elba well, improving infrastructure and introducing many legal and social reforms aimed at improving life on the island. Hey Napoleon, just coming in to check on how it's all going. Holy smokes! But it wasn't all good. For one thing, he learned of the death of his first wife Josephine and was deeply saddened. He was forbidden from seeing his son and current wife, and in Austria, Emperor Francis had ordered a local count to seduce her, so she would forget about Napoleon. Then, the new King Louis XVIII refused to give Napoleon his agreed pension. He was under constant threat of assassination, and there were even rumors that the Allies were thinking of relocating him somewhere even more remote. But the biggest problem was that Napoleon was once the master of Europe. He had lived a thrilling life of adventure, fame, and glory. Now, he found himself on a tiny island in the Mediterranean, and he was bored. Wouldn't it be nice if he could somehow return to France and reclaim his throne? Hey Napoleon, want to go back to France and reclaim your throne? I would, Pierre. But how? Well, I was thinking we could just take this boat. Will that work? Surprisingly, yes. Pierre, remember when I told you no one would ever kiss you? Yes, sire. Well, pucker up, boyo. Yay. When Napoleon left Elba, it wasn't really the daring escape you might think. He basically had kind of a leaving ceremony, hopped on a ship, and sailed back to France. He brought with him an army of about 1,000 men, and he began his journey to Paris. However, in Paris, there was now a new king, and at first, the people largely accepted him because the last few years of war under Napoleon had brought immense death and economic suffering. That's right, the king is back, baby. Divine right to rule. Don't worry, everyone. I know the economy is kaput, but I and my courtiers will withdraw into this palace, and we will definitely work as hard as we can to fix everything. Oh yeah, that's why we got rid of the king. As the Bourbon monarchy began to look more and more like a return to the past, and the returning nobility seemed hellbent on regaining their lost privileges, the people weren't too happy. And so, Napoleon hoped that his glorious return would be met with jubilation. In the end, the reaction was a little mixed, but many were happy to see their old emperor.
Mixed all the way to like his former marshals. Like some people, I think it was like 60-40. 60% of his marshals were like for it. They're like, yes, this is I am loyal to my emperor. 40% were more loyal to France. So you had like an individual loyalty or a country loyalty. That was really the divide.
Your Majesty, it seems that Napoleon is back and marching this way with 1,000 men. That guy? No problem. I have hundreds of thousands of men. Send them to arrest him. Your Majesty, it seems the thousands of men we sent to arrest Napoleon have all joined his side. Well, I'm off to Belgium. If you ever need a king again, be sure to let me know. As Napoleon continued his journey, the king had sent battalions of men to stop him, but they largely comprised of Napoleon's old soldiers, many unhappy with King Louis's military reforms. And so, when ordered to arrest him, they simply couldn't do it. In one famous incident, the troops began to cry out, "Long live the Emperor!"
Vive l'Empereur!
When Napoleon reached Paris, with King Louis having fled, he entered unopposed to reclaim his throne. Napoleon was back from the dead. Okay everyone, now that we've finally gotten rid of that guy, let's try to make sure something like this can never happen again. What's that doing there? Hey fellow monarchs!
They must have been terrified, bro.
This time, Napoleon promised he would be a mucho good boy and not start any wars. But the Allied leaders were having none of it. They declared Napoleon an outlaw and the illegitimate ruler of France. Then, they declared war, not on France, but on Napoleon himself. And when you have multiple empires declaring war on you as an individual, that's how you know you're a very naughty boy. The Allied powers began making plans to combine their forces and once again invade France. The most immediate threat to Napoleon were the British and Prussians hanging out in nearby Belgium. If Napoleon could knock them out quickly, maybe he could force the Allies to negotiate, and maybe he could hold on to his power. Together, the two armies to the north outnumbered him, so he made a plan to divide them and take them on separately. Historians debate how much of a chance Napoleon had here, but this same strategy of dividing and conquering had worked for him multiple times. He marched north with 125,000 men and took on the Allies in a number of initial engagements, defeating the Prussians before turning to take on the British. But to Napoleon's dismay, miscommunication and hesitation among his marshals allowed both enemy armies to retreat, and crucially, rather than fleeing east, the Prussians moved north, where they could remain in contact with the British. Napoleon sent a force to hold off the Prussians as he moved in on the British, now holding a defensive position at Waterloo. Prussian General Blücher sent word that he would come to Wellington's aid if he could just hold off the French for long enough. Napoleon had to defeat Wellington before the Prussian army could arrive in force, and it was close. The British held the high ground and a number of key defensive buildings across the battlefield. After waiting some hours he didn't have for the ground to dry, Napoleon sent men to assault the Hougoumont farm, but the British-German garrison there held out. French Marshal Ney launched a number of miscalculated cavalry charges at the British lines. The British formed defensive square formations, and they tore the French cavalry to shreds, while one guy chose the absolute worst time to go on a bender. The French did manage to capture a farmhouse directly in front of the British line, and from there, they unleashed artillery hellfire on the British square formations. And as Napoleon sent his Imperial Guard in to finish the British off, a nervous Wellington knew his lines were at breaking point. But the Prussians had earlier begun to arrive, and now they were arriving in large numbers. And after the British held out and sent the French Imperial Guard running, the French lines panicked, fearing they had been encircled, and they began to flee. The Battle of Waterloo was an Allied victory. And with that, Napoleon's hopes of returning to glory were vanquished. He knew he was defeated. He went to the British and said, "Can I please have a house near London?" And
yeah, he wanted to live in Britain. No way!
The British replied, no. Instead, to make sure Napoleon was put away once and for all, they sent him to one of the most isolated and remote places they could think of, a tiny island in the Atlantic Ocean, St. Helena. Here, a deeply isolated and depressed Emperor Napoleon would live the remaining years of his life. His house was a wooden bungalow, not exactly on par with the Tuileries Palace. Much to his frustration, his captors referred to him as General, rather than calling him Emperor. His mail was censored, his visitors were vetted. There was almost no way he could escape such an isolated island. But just to be sure, he was guarded by 2,000 British soldiers and 2 ships that circled the island 24 hours a day.
Isn't that insane just for one man?
He had once been the most powerful man alive, and images of the victorious Napoleon depict a strong leader, hand firmly in jacket. Depictions of Napoleon on St. Helena show a disheveled old man, hand firmly in pants. He had lost everything. And by the way, he was only 46, so maybe it's about time you know what? You're doing all right, kid. Napoleon fought one last battle while on the island. The battle for his reputation. He spent hours writing his memoirs, espousing his achievements, recording his greatness, and turning himself and his story into a phenomenal legend. And in this battle, he certainly succeeded. His mark on history cannot be denied. After his defeat, the European monarchs had got to work restoring Europe to its traditional balance and reasserting their dominance. But after Napoleon had spread the influence of the French Revolution, these returning monarchs would have a difficult time regaining their absolute control. France returned to the rule of the Bourbons, but it would go on to stage another revolution, and then another one. Reaction to Napoleon's rule in places like Germany and Italy propelled forward the ideas and feelings of modern unity and nationalism, and his Napoleonic Code still remains the basis of law in various modern countries. The modern world owes a lot to Napoleon's legacy. He remains statistically possibly the greatest military general in history, and his revolutionary military tactics changed the face of warfare. He was the last truly great leader to both lead his armies in battle while retaining total political control over a vast empire. There's still hope for Joe Biden, but the man
There's no hope for Joe Biden.
remains somewhat of an enigma, and we still aren't sure exactly what to make of him in some regards. Was he the champion of the French Revolution, spreading equality wherever he went, or did he betray it by making himself an absolute monarch and restricting certain liberties? Was he an ambitious and aggressive conqueror, hell-bent on bringing Europe to its knees? Or was he simply defending himself against an aggressive Europe, hell-bent on reducing his power? Some things will continue to be debated. Napoleon died at the age of 51, officially of stomach cancer, but some believe he may have been poisoned. The British buried him in a tin coffin, inside a mahogany coffin, inside a lead coffin, inside another mahogany coffin. I guess this time, they wanted to make sure he stayed where they put him. In 1840, his remains were moved to Paris, where they now rest under the dome of Les Invalides. The man from humble origins, with huge ambition, ruthless determination, immaculate skill on the battlefield, and a hefty dose of luck, who was determined to make his mark on history, did just that. There is no immortality, he said, but the memory that is left in the minds of men. And in that sense, Napoleon knew he would live on forever.
That is such a unstated quote here. There is no immortality, but the memory that is left in the minds of men. To have lived without glory, without leaving a trace of one's existence, is to not lived at all. Meaning, without having your memory or your achievements passed on, your life never existed in the history books.
Oh, and to reiterate, he was definitely average height for the time.
What a great series. We did the French Revolution and we did the Napoleonic Wars by Oversimplified. Amazing work there. If you haven't subscribed to Oversimplified, you better go do that, because you're going to have a complex, entertaining, and educating, systematic piece of videos that you need to watch. As for what I do here, I'm just trying to soak it all in and learn alongside you guys. That is very simple manner of what I do. And you know, hopefully continuously throughout this channel and the future of this channel, we'll start to put all that contextualization of the history of not just Europe, but the entire world together, so we can better understand each other, understand our past, understand our present, so we can prepare for the future the best way possible. I appreciate you guys watching. I appreciate every single comment, every single like, every single person that subscribes. You'll never believe how much I appreciate it, but I'll say it one more time. I appreciate it. I hope you have a great day. I hope you have a great week. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye-bye.